In a quiet courtroom in Long Beach, California, a judge slapped an $80,000 fine on the defendant before he even spoke a word. No files were reviewed, no testimony heard, just a decision made before he stepped through the door. But this man came ready, not to beg, but to prove. What happened next turned everything upside down. This is a story about dignity, law, and what happens when silence meets truth. Let's go back to that morning when Snoop Dogg walked into courtroom 3B, thinking it would be a quick check-in. It was just after sunrise in Long Beach, the air thick with ocean mist, and the hum of the city waking up. The courthouse sat near the boardwalk, where palm trees swayed and seagulls circled. Inside, courtroom 3B was set for a routine procedural hearing paperwork, a brief appearance, nothing heavy. But the second Snoop stepped through those double doors, he felt the vibe shift. The room was too quiet, not the respectful kind you expect in court, but a heavy, controlled silence, like someone had hit mute before he arrived. No one greeted him. No one nodded. Even the clerk, who usually gave a quick glance or a "yo, what's good," kept her eyes locked on her screen. Snoop strolled toward the defense table, his sneakers making soft, deliberate squeaks on the polished floor. He was dressed sharp, custom black tracksuit, minimal bling, braids tight, shades off professional, precise, prepared. Yet, as he moved through that room, it felt like he'd crashed someone else's party, like he'd sat down at a table where nobody sent him an invite. The chairs were familiar, the lights the same, but the energy? It had flipped. Out the corner of his eye, he caught a quick exchange, subtle, but real. A clerk leaned toward the prosecutor's table, whispered something, and let out a soft chuckle. The prosecutor, a young dude in a cheap suit, smirked. But when Snoop glanced their way, the clerk's eyes dropped fast, like looking at him was too much. It wasn't new. It wasn't loud. But it was there. Snoop knew that silence. He'd felt it before, not just in courtrooms, but in studios, on sets, in boardrooms, where folks assumed he was just the talent, not the boss. For a second, his mind flashed back to a meeting years ago when he was pitching a project. The exec called him the wrong name, not once, not twice, but 3 times. His name was on the contract, the poster, the damn building, but the guy never looked up, never fixed it. The worst part? Nobody in the room thought it was weird. Back in courtroom 3B, Snoop exhaled slow, brushing his hand along the edge of the defense table. His case file sat closed in front of him, neat, centered, just like always. To anyone watching, he looked chill. But Snoop wasn't here for theatrics. He was here for process, for truth, and maybe, just maybe, for a fight he didn't start but was ready to finish. The door to the judge's chambers creaked open. No gavel, no announcement, just the quiet shuffle of authority stepping in. Judge Ronald Baxter emerged with the swagger of a man who'd run more courtrooms than rap battles. He didn't nod, didn't glance at the lawyers, didn't acknowledge the room. He just walked in, robe flowing behind him, and sat. The chair took him like a throne waiting for its king. With a sharp tug at his sleeve, he adjusted the black fabric across his chest, not for comfort, but for control. A small move, but deliberate. Snoop's eyes lifted, not all the way, just enough. He didn't expect a handshake, but what he saw was colder than he figured. He'd heard about Baxter, infamous in the streets, a judge who treated hearings like pit stops and due process like old vinyl nobody spun anymore. One clerk called him efficient. Another said he was allergic to debate. Those were just polite ways of saying he didn't listen. He didn't care. Baxter rested his elbows on the bench, scanned no papers, asked no questions. Then, with a voice low, clipped, and cold as ice, he spoke. The violation is clear. Fine, $80,000 to be paid immediately. This matter is closed. No intro, no review of facts, no chance for anyone to speak. Just a verdict, like a shot caller shutting down a deal he didn't respect. A quiet wave of confusion rippled through the courtroom. The young prosecutor, who'd been shuffling his notes, froze, eyes darting to Baxter, then Snoop, then back, like he'd missed a verse. The court reporter blinked twice, fingers hovering over her keys, unsure if she should type. The gallery went still, even the rustle of a dude's jacket in the back row stopped. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause, held down by the raw weight of Baxter's words. Snoop didn't move. His case folder stayed closed, untouched. He hadn't said a word. Inside, his pulse ticked up not panic, but disbelief. He thought of something his old mentor once told him, back when he was coming up in Long Beach. Justice needs a beat, a rhythm. Tyranny just needs a mic. And here it was, dropped without evidence, without bars, without respect. But what hit him hardest, what made the air tighten around his chest, wasn't the fine. It was how normal it felt, how nobody stood up, how nobody gasped, how nobody questioned it. They'd seen this before. Maybe not with him, maybe not this bold, but the game was familiar. This wasn't just injustice, it was the system's default track. For a split second, he wondered how many other voices got muted before they could even spit a rhyme. A moment passed, then another. Still, nobody spoke. The fine was laid down, the matter called closed. Yet Snoop Dogg stayed seated, eyes steady, hands folded, heart thumping in a slow, steady flow under his tracksuit. He didn't speak right away, not out of fear, but because he knew the power of a pause, especially in a room expecting him to freestyle. Then, with the kind of cool that makes silence shake, he stood, not fast, not to make a scene, but slow, deliberate. His right hand brushed his chest lightly, like he was centering his flow. And then he spoke. "Your Honor," he said, voice calm but solid, with respect, "I ain't been heard. I ain't been allowed to speak." His tone wasn't wild, wasn't heated, it was just true. And for that, it cut deeper than any loud verse could. The room didn't shift, but something in it did, like the air before a beat drops. Baxter blinked, like he was annoyed the track hadn't ended when he said, "Stop." He leaned back, lips tightening, and spoke with a smirk that came from power left unchecked too long. "Mr. Broadens," he said, flat, "this ain't a stage. We ain't here for rhymes today." His words landed like a diss, meant to shut Snoop down, make him fade out. But Snoop didn't fade. He didn't drop his gaze. He didn't ask permission. He knew his rights, and more importantly, he knew his worth. "With respect, Your Honor," he replied, smooth, "this ain't no show. This is due process, and I'm entitled to it, just like every soul who steps in this room. No shake in his voice, no shift in his stance, just stillness, the kind that makes even the hardest gavel feel light." For a quick second, the room took a breath, like it wasn't sure what came next. And in that breath, a quiet truth hit those watching. This wasn't just a rapper spitting facts. This was a black man standing tall in a system that expected him to bow. He wasn't asking for justice. He was claiming the mic to speak it. Snoop didn't move right away. He stood still, eyes level, breath steady, like a DJ waiting for the perfect beat to drop. Then, without a word, he reached down and opened his case folder. Every move was clean. No fumble, no rush, because he'd rehearsed this in his mind, in his studio, in every room that ever made him prove himself twice. He laid the first page on the table, then the second, then the third. To most, they looked like regular papers. To Snoop, they were bars, and this courtroom was his stage. He didn't look up as he spoke. His voice was steady, sharp, but not loud, the kind that carries truth without needing a megaphone. "Let's talk precedent," he said, "'cause what's going down here? It's been tried before and it didn't hold." He raised the first page, tapping the corner. "Jackson v. State of California. Defendant got hit with a fine under city code. No photos, no inspection, no affidavit, just one cop's word. Appeals court flipped it, full stop. Their ruling? No evidence, no enforcement. Due process, don't play with assumptions." He paused, letting the silence soak up every word. Next, he unfolded the second paper, crisp, marked up. "Martinez v. City of Oakland. Cop dropped a $20,000 fine based on visual observation. No timestamp, no notes. City called it standard. Court said, nah. Ruling, authority don't live in a vacuum. Fines glottal stand on facts, or they're void under the Constitution." A stir in the gallery, subtle but real. The court reporter glanced at Baxter. The prosecutor sat up straighter. A woman in the back row leaned forward, eyebrows tight, not doubting, but waking up. Then Snoop raised the third page, his hands steady, firm. Thompson v. City of San Diego. Worker got slapped with a $15,000 fine for a code violation. No inspection, no backup. Court called it straight exploitation. Their words? "A fine without proof ain't justice. It's the system flexing for convenience." He lowered the page, but his eyes stayed up, locked on the bench. "Your Honor," he said, low, $80,000. No documentation, no hearing, no argument allowed. Just your word. And respectfully, that ain't justice. His voice dropped, but it cut. That's power dressed up in a robe. The words hit harder than a baseline, and the room felt it. The clerk started typing again, faster now. The prosecutor, once chill, was now bolt upright, hands clasped tight. Even Baxter twitched a jaw flex, a glance at the papers, fingers tapping once on the bench. But Snoop didn't flex. He didn't grin. He just stood there, cool, collected, and razor sharp. The room that once overlooked him was now locked on him, listening. He'd taken the mic, not by yelling, not by pleading, but by showing everyone there that law without process ain't law at all. Baxter didn't respond right away. He stared at Snoop, like a man deciding whether to push or fold. But his silence wasn't deep, it was tactical, tight. His fingers drummed lightly on the bench, offbeat, not a habit, a tell. And Snoop clocked it. He didn't break eye contact. He didn't blink. The paper still lay spread on the table, cases loaded like verses, undeniable, steady. Behind them, his hand rested flat, anchoring not just the paper, but the principle. The room held its breath. Then Baxter shifted, straightened, cleared his throat. This court, he said, voice thinner now, will recess for 15 minutes to review procedural matters. No explanation, no nod, just a clipped line wrapped in control. He stood before anyone could speak. The bailiff moved fast to open the chamber door, and Baxter slipped through without another word, robe trailing like a flag backing off. He didn't look back. And that, more than anything, told the truth. This wasn't a pause, it was a retreat, a slick escape dressed as protocol, because Baxter had just felt something he hadn't in years. Doubt. Snoop watched him go. He didn't exhale. He didn't move. He stayed standing, back straight, hands on the stack of precedent he'd just dropped like a classic track. He wasn't waiting, he was witnessing. And what he saw was a man who'd spent years running courtrooms, now dipping out of one, not to think, but to scramble. Baxter wasn't hunting justice. He was hunting leverage. A call, a loophole, a way to mute what had already been spit too clear. But it was too late. The silence after Baxter left wasn't the kind that follows a ruling. It was the kind that follows a shift. The room had tilted not because Snoop had shouted, not because he'd demanded, but because he'd stood firm and refused to fade. And now, with Baxter gone, the courtroom didn't feel still anymore. It felt alive, like it had just realized who was really holding the beat. Snoop stayed exactly where he was, silent, steady, hands on the folder, eyes straight ahead. He wasn't just holding ground. He was the ground. Then the chamber door opened. But it wasn't just Baxter coming back. A second figure stepped in behind him, taller, older, draped in a black robe that carried more weight than fabric should. Judge Marcus Coleman. The name alone hushed the gallery. Federal oversight, retired appeals court legend, a man whose rulings could shake cities like a West Coast quake. He didn't shout. He didn't flex. He didn't need to. Even the bailiff stood taller, like he felt the shift in the room's gravity. Coleman walked with a slow, deliberate stride, like he owned every step without trying. Baxter trailed slightly behind, shoulders slouched, eyes down. Whatever control he thought he had, he'd lost it the second Coleman walked in. When they hit the bench, Baxter cleared his throat, voice weak. For the record, he said, I've invited Judge Coleman to observe and, if needed, provide guidance on certain procedural matters that have come up. The words sounded official, clean, but everyone in that room heard the real track. This wasn't oversight. It was a lifeline. Baxter had fumbled the beat, and now he needed someone heavier to hold the walls up before they crashed. Coleman didn't sit right away. He stood by the bench for a moment, glancing at the case file in front of him. Then he turned toward Snoop. His eyes were sharp, not cold, but precise, like he was sizing up more than Snoop's fit or his stance. He was measuring his prep, his roots, his edge. And Snoop? He met that gaze, holding it 1 second longer than he had to not defiance, but a statement. He knew what this was. He wasn't just facing Baxter anymore, he was up against the whole system. Finally, Coleman spoke, voice clear, controlled. Mr. Broadens, he said, you've raised constitutional concerns about the enforcement of City Code 19G. I'd like you to restate your core argument for the record. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a request. It was a test, a live sound check with power listening. A lesser cat might have stumbled, checked notes, switched tones. Snoop did none of that. He didn't flinch. He just straightened his frame a half-inch and replied, "Yes, Your Honor. I'll start with the due process violations, backed by appeals court precedent." His voice didn't just answer, it landed. And just like that, the room, once Baxter's stage, belonged to Snoop. Because in the space between Coleman's question and his response, something real had been restored. The law was finally being heard by someone who came to spit it. The bailiff called the next name. "Officer Derek Holt, please take the stand." A man in uniform rose from the back, posture tight, composed, unbothered. He walked like someone used to eyes on him, used to being followed. His navy jacket was crisp, badge shining. To anyone new to the case, he looked solid, official, professional, legit. But Snoop wasn't watching the Polish. He was clocking the gaps, the quiet spots where truth likes to hide. Holt took the oath with ease, sat in the witness chair, and folded his hands across his lap like this was just another day. Snoop stepped forward, not wild, not dramatic, just enough to close the space between question and consequence. "Officer Holt," he began, tone neutral, "you issued the citation that led to the $80,000 fine against me, right?" Holt nodded once. "Yes, sir. And that citation was based on a violation you saw with your own eyes." "That's correct." Snoop paused. "You got any photos to back that up?" "No, sir." "Filed a detailed incident report?" "No." "Any sketches, diagrams?" "No." "Witness statements?" "None present." "City camera footage?" "Not necessary." Holt's voice stayed calm, polite, but a slight edge was creeping in the kind that shows up when confidence starts feeling heat. Snoop tilted his head just a bit. "Was anyone else there when this so-called violation went down?" "No," Holt said. "I was alone." "So, let me get this straight," Snoop said. "Slow, you dropped an $80,000 fine based only on your say-so. No photos, no record, no witnesses, no proof." Holt's jaw tightened. "I've been on this job 20 years. I know a violation when I see one." And there it was, the line Snoop was waiting for, the slip from facts to feelings. He let the silence sit for a second. Then, with the smoothest tone he'd used all day and the sharpest edge beneath it, he spoke. "I'm sure you do, officer, but we ain't here to vibe on instincts. We're here for evidence." He turned back to the bench, voice cool but direct. "Your Honors, what we got here ain't enforcement. It's assumption, not process projection. Officer Holt didn't document a crime. He felt one, then called that feeling law." His gaze slid back to Holt, steady, unflinching. "Can you point to one thing in that citation file, anything that's hard, verifiable proof?" Holt looked at him, then at the bench, then back. "No, sir," he said, quieter now. Snoop didn't gloat. He didn't flash a grin. He just let Holt's words settle like smoke over the courtroom. Then he dropped the line nobody would forget. "What you issued wasn't a citation. It was your opinion in a badge." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Snoop lowered his voice, but the room leaned in. "I wish I could say this was just about me." He opened his folder again, this time not for laws or rulings, but for names, real people. Each one like a mark on a map of quiet pain. He lifted the first page. "Marlon Tate," he said, "Vietnam vet from Compton. Ran a small barbershop for 20 years, cutting hair for anyone who couldn't pay, especially homies, down on their luck. One day, the city flagged his license, said he missed a box on a form. No heads up, no call, just shut him down. He lost the shop, then his crib." A pause, a breath. His fingers tightened slightly on the page before setting it down. They sent him an apology letter, no signature. He didn't look up yet. He reached for the next one. Lila Morales, top mechanic, 15 years, no complaints. Then the city rewrote a licensing rule, and her cert didn't carry over. Nobody explained why. She lost her contracts, her crew, ended up leaving the state. Another breath. Snoop blinked once, slow, but kept going. The last story hit heaviest, even though it was short. Ray Jenkins, retired trucker, built a deck with his own hands. It crossed the city line by 10 inches. They fined him $12,000. When he tore it down, they hit him again for incomplete removal. He laid the last page beside the others, a row of silent callouts. Then he looked up, voice steady but deeper, anchored. "Let's not act like this is just about me. It never was." He let that sit. The stillness thickened. This is what happens when rules turn into weapons. When nobody checks if a fine's fair, just if it's filed right. When the system don't care who it rolls over, long as the paperwork's clean. He turned his eyes to the gallery, not just the bench. These stories don't make it to law books, but they're everywhere. People who didn't have a folder, a voice, or a second shot. He looked back to the judges, and this time even Baxter couldn't dodge his gaze. Today, I stood here because I knew how. Marlon didn't. Lila didn't. Ray didn't. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it hit like a drum. So I'm standing for them too. The silence after Snoop's last words wasn't empty. It was alive, heavy, real. It hung there for long seconds, like the room itself was processing what just went down. Then Baxter leaned forward, his voice thinner than before, trying to hold weight it no longer had. This court, he said, retains judicial discretion. We don't have to accept every argument. But he didn't finish because Snoop cut in, not loud, not forceful, but with a tone that sliced cleaner than any objection. Discretion, he said, ain't a pass for bias, and it ain't a shield for mistakes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words didn't echo, they landed, flat, final, unshaken. Coleman shifted, slow, deliberate. He hadn't spoken since asking Snoop to restate his case, but now, as the room's weight tipped fully his way, he placed both hands gently on the bench and spoke. I've heard enough. The whole room froze. Mr. Broadus is correct. Judicial discretion can't override constitutional standards. It can't swap assumption for fact. A pause. In this case, we got no documentation, no witness testimony, no verifiable evidence. He looked not at Snoop, but at Baxter, not with shade, but with the calm gravity of someone dropping truth. This court can't and shouldn't uphold a fine built on one man's belief alone. If we do, we're not setting precedent for justice. We're setting it for unchecked power. Then the final words, clear, firm, no debate. The fine is vacated, the charge is dismissed. Nobody cheered, nobody clapped, but the silence broke like a chain snapping under strain. The court reporter's hands stopped. The prosecutor leaned back slow, like he was letting go of something he'd been holding tight. And Snoop? He didn't smile. He didn't relax. He just closed his folder softly, like sealing a track that was done. For him, this wasn't a win, it was a fix. And justice, when it came, didn't come with fireworks. It came in full bars, clear logic, and law that couldn't be denied. The gavel never hit. There was no big slam, no voice booming for recess. Just stillness, the kind that comes after something breaks and something better starts. Snoop gathered his papers in silence. No rush, no flex, just gravity. As he passed the bench, Baxter, still seated, still quiet, spoke low. I underestimated you. He didn't look at Snoop directly. He couldn't. His voice wasn't angry anymore, just tired, like a man who'd seen his own flaws in the mix and didn't like the playback. Snoop paused, just for a second. You ain't the first, fam, he said, then kept walking. Each step across the courtroom floor felt measured, like bars in a verse that had finally landed. He passed rows of silent faces, some shocked, some reverent, some wide-eyed, like they'd just seen something they didn't know could happen. He didn't meet their stares, but they followed him with theirs. The heavy courtroom doors swung open, and the Long Beach sun hit the floor, catching his back, his shoulders, the edge of his folder. It followed him out, because what he carried now wasn't just papers, it was precedent. And precedent moves fast when truth clears the deck. Weeks later, a small headline popped up in a local paper. Long Beach Court reopens review of over 400 citations. It didn't stop there. Other lawyers started filing appeals, name-dropping Broadus v. City Code 19G. Communities that had stayed quiet started speaking up. Clerks dug into old files, reporters asked new questions. In barbershops, taco trucks, church lots, and street corners, people of color started talking about justice, like it could actually happen, not because the system flipped overnight, but because someone stood up and made it pause. Snoop never did interviews. He didn't run for mayor. He didn't drop a book. But somewhere in a city hall meeting, a courtroom, or a flyer stapled to a pole, you might hear his name whispered. Not as a hero, not as a headline, but as a man who reminded the law what it's supposed to protect. A black man standing solo, and the whole legal system finally stopping to listen. This wasn't just a story about a courtroom. It was about holding your ground when the ground tries to shake you. It was about truth, dignity, and the quiet power of refusing to be erased. Legal precedents analysis, civil rights history, more vivid descriptions.